Kubernetes for Humans.
Hey everyone, happy to have you guys back to Kubernetes for Human podcast. Today with me in the call, we have Wouter. Wouter, let's introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm Wouter. I'm coming from the Netherlands. I'm currently living in Romania for the past 4 years, and I'm working there with Kubernetes. Basically on building and deploying applications in ING.
Okay, it sounds cool. So, like always, I'll be happy if you can share a bit about your journey, both into like computer science, but also for Kubernetes in particular, like why, what, how, and so on.
Yeah, so I can start by saying how I started with Kubernetes. This is quite some time ago, I think 6 years ago. This was really when Kubernetes was a very new thing in ING. It was already getting there in the industry, I would say, but in ING it was still relatively new. Back in the time I was working in the Philippines, and we were building a bank from scratch. And one of the things that we determined is we are going to build this with Kubernetes. We didn't know how yet. There was almost no knowledge of Kubernetes inside the company, but we know we're going to do it with that. That's also the time when I joined the project, also with zero knowledge of Kubernetes. And that's how we started. We made a lot of learnings. We made a lot of mistakes early in the start, but we also had that freedom. And we ended up bringing it live in 9 months.
Now you must hold for a second, but when are you building like a bank? It's like I never heard about like building a bank in the Philippines. So if you can share a bit more about that. And also, why did they choose Kubernetes, right? Like it was new back then, not necessarily like bank infra. I would guess like most banks that Commodore works with at the moment are just starting their like journey into implementing Kubernetes. So if you can share more about like why did you guys build that, and also why did you choose Kubernetes?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it was funny when you would say you're building a bank, most people think you're laying bricks. But when we said we're building a bank, we're actually writing the code for all the APIs. So we have certain systems that we had in place already. For example, system for user data, system for payments. But then you have a lot of APIs around it to making everything actually work, and also with your applications. So your front application, your web applications that has to connect to the backend. That was all not in place. And although we do have other banks we had other banks already, but still a lot of things had to be built for the Philippines. Why did we use Kubernetes? So basically, the whole of ING was running on-prem, and we said in order to be more scalable for the future, we want to use Kubernetes. Back then, it was decided, and that's why we got started with it. This is already a long time ago. It's 6 years ago. A lot has changed. We actually have our own container hosting platform within ING. This is what we run Kubernetes on, and we have something that's called namespace as a service. So if a team wants to use a namespace, all they have to do is just order it in our portal, and they can get started with their namespace, and they don't have to worry about the compliancy, the multi-tenancy, and everything around it.
So this was like, did this exist back then, or when you started like building and like implementing the first infra, you needed to do like everything from scratch?
When we started, this was being built as well, and
at the same time, right?
Yeah, at the same time. Yeah. So the whole idea was to have a platform layer which is running all your Kubernetes namespaces, and your basically was running Kubernetes on the infrastructure, and then you have the application teams which are building these applications running inside the containers.
It sounds cool. So maybe you can share like something hard from back then, right? Like, or like some obstacle, and also something nice, right? Let's try to.
I think something hard was really there weren't any banks running on Kubernetes, and there were obviously other applications like, but not that many in the financial industry. So that was a bit of a greenfield and what do we have to do. And I think also from the perspective of building the applications, we didn't have that much knowledge and experience. Like how do you deal with the heavy loads and how are the applications going to respond? And also, we are also going to connect to applications which do not run on Kubernetes. So there were a lot of learnings there. And I think later on, I think that was where we had our biggest learnings was to standardize the whole pipeline. Because when we started, we had all individual pipelines. Everybody was building and deploying their applications by themselves. And I think that was our biggest learning. At some point, we said, we're just going to standardize everything, the way you build, deploy, and run your application. In the end, it's all Kubernetes jobs. If we standardize that, we can make everything way more reliable and scalable.
I think
that was the biggest learning that we had.
I think it's something that, everyone would work with, like a lot of like different people or developers or system. Like you get to the point where you can't allow everyone to have like the freedom, the max freedom of, you can do everything. You must tell them you're going to, I'm not sure like what was the case for you, but you're going to have like one Docker file or one build, and this is what you have to do. I promise you it's going to work as long as you're going to follow the rules, but you can't really go sideways. And, even for a much larger, like not that large of scale, I also encounter it. Like standardization and hard defaults are like the number one thing that you need when you need to serve like a lot of people, I guess. Okay, so like after that, like you build the bank, like is it working correctly? Like are the Philippines happy with their ING bank?
It was working correctly. It's currently not running anymore because we actually left the Philippines. But I would say the more interesting part started after that because we started using Kubernetes in ING, in all the rest of ING. So in a way, it was also a good learning for the rest of the company. And now we are using, I don't have the exact numbers, unfortunately, but we are using it a lot. And I think it really made us more scalable, more efficient throughout ING.
What like other like interesting project on ING like you worked with? Okay, so you finished this project, you came back with a lot of knowledge, like compared to the industry. I guess you had really like a vast amount of knowledge because Kubernetes was still quite young, like it's like a couple of years ago. You guys did everything from scratch using Kubernetes. So what were the next big things that you implemented on ING, like using Kubernetes? And like, what's the role of Kubernetes? Like you talked about the internal like system that you guys have. Do developers? I will stop for a second and let you answer, and then I will ask like a follow-up.
Yeah, so I don't want to just talk about me personally, but also in what ING achieved, because we the team that has built this platform of container hosting inside ING, they're called the Tiger team. They did an amazing job in actually making sure the platform works safe, reliable. They recently did a presentation at KubeCon about their zero trust policy or zero trust networks. I think it's pretty cool to see where we got to, and also to see how things are developing in the industry. And that's pretty cool.
Oh, it sounds pretty cool. So like are currently like you're working on what, or like what is like the current thing that you're doing in ING?
Currently I'm working on platforms. I'm currently working in a department called Platform Operations, and we try to actually make the platforms more efficient and to run better. So I think you understand, the concept about platform teams. So you have a team that takes away the heavy lifting for a piece that's not always on the top of the mind of people. Things like if you have Cassandra running, or you have Prometheus, RTK, all these kind of things, or also Kubernetes, as you can run as a platform, your pipelines. Now, at some point, you have so many platform teams that it's also important to really manage those well. For example, if you want to use certain tooling, which we have in-house, how do you know which tool to use for what? Which versions are you going to use? How is everything going to work together? So within this platform operations, we work on cyber reliability engineering, risk security, service creation, and that kind of stuff.
And like, so just so I understand, like for people who don't know platform engineers, like I think one of the challenges is a lot of the time a question of abstraction. Like I'm a developer in ING, right? Like how much do I need to know and how much does you take care for me? Like what do where do you draw the line? Like between what you guys are responsible to what the developer needs to know? Does he need to know that you're on Kubernetes, for example? Like, go for it.
Yeah, I think you always have to know what is underneath. You just don't need to know how everything exactly works. A platform team is there, and also platforms in general are there to take away cognitive loads and take away the heavy lifting. But that doesn't mean that you have to know all the details. An example of what we did with our deployments is we set a lot of defaults. For example, things like anti-pot affinity. That is not something that you get with Kubernetes when you just install it and when you run your applications. But when you do get it by default, it's only better because the moment that you need it is there. This is not something that I think you can ask of everyone who is developing an application to know when they're running things on Kubernetes. I think it's also something that you will see if you just look at the deployment files which are out there to deploy applications. These are settings which are normally overlooked. So these defaults, which I think the industry knows that they are best practices, we can just put them in there and say, this is now a default for everyone. Unless you really know what you're doing, you get some kind of an exception. But this is, I think, where the platform teams really help. And also by, I think, enforcing the standards. If you have monitoring and you want to do monitoring in a certain way, you can say, oh, guys, please use this version. Please, when you, for example, run it by yourself, please don't use this function, don't do that. If you're a platform team, you actually own that application. You can just say you don't allow it. These versions, they're not supported anymore. They cannot be used anymore. These kind of functions, you just disable them. That way you enforce the standards. And that way you also, it's easier to manage the standards inside the company.
Like not usually, but a lot of the time there are like clashes, I will say, between, I don't know, like different dev teams and the platform team, right? Like, because like developers like to build their own things, right? Like, and a lot of the times you don't necessarily want to get this like ready-made platform from like people who don't really know what you are doing and it's never good enough or whatever. Do you see like, how do you know that you're like really doing, I'm sure that you're doing a great job.
Yeah.
What's the feedback loop? How do you learn? Yeah, like walk me through. Is there a product owner for what you are doing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There is definitely a product owner in these platform teams because you're maintaining a tool in the end, and that tool is also a product. It's important for the people that are working in these platform teams to really understand the people that are consuming it, and that doesn't just matter. So normally when you're making a product on the market, like you guys are making Commodore, it's very important to understand the customer needs, because if the customer doesn't like it, they will not buy it and you don't have a business case. Inside the company, that's a little bit different, but it should work the same, because when we offer a tool inside the company, people, they have to use it. They don't have a choice. But that is not a reason to not think about the consumer. You still have to think about the consumer. You still have to make sure that everything is clear. And the difficult thing about it is that in a company, there are normally a lot of different channels. There are different lines to reach out. And these developers can also become quite overwhelmed. People send them emails, private messages, never using the support channels. That's a difficult thing to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the, what was the question again?
Like, how do you know that you're doing like a good job? Like, how is the feedback like, and how do you know what to implement next? Like, is it the industry best practice because you go to KubeCon and you learn, or because some developer tell you, hey, I just tried to deploy my job and it took me forever and it's really bad or whatever. How do you know what to do?
So that we have a platform team, that means that we have pretty smart people that know a lot about that product that are working. For example, if platform team for Kubernetes, you have Kubernetes experts working in a team. That doesn't mean that the people that are not working in a team know nothing about it. So it's important to have an open dialogue when we have people in ING, which are Kubernetes experts, which are not working in that team, but they give each other feedback and they openly discuss, okay, how can we actually make this better? So it's important to always have a dialogue on, the how, why was this implemented this way, and how can we make this better as a whole? So we don't want to have the silos and this is how it's going to be and just deal with it. We want to have an open dialogue with that.
Are most features come from like you guys, or like is it listening to the field? Like what's the
Well, they are definitely listening to the field. I mean, I think you can see if you look on the times that we went to conferences, we are quite present at conferences like KubeCon, but also other conferences like QCon and different Cube and QCon, but also other conferences which are about cloud and other technology conferences. We listen to the to the market, but we also share our stories there, and that's also how we try to learn. And we also obviously have we talk to the other companies which are using it to try to learn as well from them.
No, it makes sense. And like, do you see like any big like changes over like the last, let's say, 2 years on the on ING? I know that you also like did a lecture, right, in KubeCon. Maybe you can also talk both on that and also share a bit like how do you see the trends that already existed, right? Like the recent trends, or like how did things change over the last couple of years?
How did things change? That's quite a difficult question. I would say we were going more and more towards a platform way of thinking. That's something that was already started a while ago, but it's getting more and more rooted in the company. On technology basis, I think since Kubernetes is more and more everywhere in the industry, you now see a lot of tool development around Kubernetes. Actually, things that companies were building in-house, you now see that there are actually companies providing these kind of toolings on the market. The difficult thing I find a bit when I look at the tooling that's being developed is there are quite some companies which want to make this one tool that does everything for you. And I don't think that's the way to go. That these kind of companies, they present themselves as you don't need any other tool, you just need me. And I think that just creates a huge dependency on also one company. And one company cannot be the best in everything, in your monitoring, in your logging, in your security, in your tracing. So I think it's very important to always look at the market and which kind of toolings are there, but also look at the toolings which are using the standards. For example, the open telemetry standard. It's important that when you use these kind of tools, if they adhere to the standard, at least you can change the toolings later on when there's more development in one area.
No, it makes sense. Like, it makes total sense. Are there any like tools that you are excited about in the
Well, of course, Commodore.
Yeah, like goes without saying. Yeah, thank you.
I think right now open telemetry or telemetry tools in general are quite interesting. I see a lot of development in there. And I also see companies kind of competing for their to being the best in the market. So I think that's quite interesting. I think also that will really really mature Kubernetes even more, because it's one of the things that's quite lacking in Kubernetes itself.
The
open telemetry.
But what do you think about like the new platform, like tools? Like you didn't mention like Backstage or like or Backstage clone.
Yeah.
Are you using it?
So Backstage is also a very interesting development, and I think the interesting thing about that is I don't really see any that big alternatives.
It's always a good place to be, by the way, and like when you are building a product that you have.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I agree on that. And I have an example, which is actually Neo4j. They're the biggest graph database out there, and they have no competition or almost no competition. I think this is one of the reasons why they are not progressing, or why the whole market around graph databases is not progressing, because there's no competition and nobody wants to step in. So I'm not agreeing with saying that it's a good place to be, maybe money-wise, because you're the only one that is able to sell that product. But if you look at competition and how the industry develops, I don't think it's a good thing, because their competition in the whole market is very good. Regarding to Backstage, I think that they have a great product when it comes to internal portals. They really, I think, fill a nice spot for corporations that have a lot of internal toolings or APIs. So yeah.
I think like it's interesting to see how, like 3 years ago, like no one was talking about, I think, like platform engineers in Kubernetes, or like almost no one. And on the latest KubeCon, like everyone were like talking about that. And maybe share a bit about both like your lectures, and also I think it's a good place maybe to talk about what do you see about the local industry, right? Like you are currently located in Romania. I know that you're having like interesting things there. So share about both. I'll be happy, if you can share with the audience about what are your passion about, like talking, what did you talk about already, and also a bit about the local things.
Yeah, so my recent talk was about technology adoption and how to do that in big enterprises. Because technology adoption is not something about we have a great tool and you just install it, now everybody can use it. There's a lot of things around it, and how to actually get people to use the tooling and how to use it in the right way. It's very important to understand that when you are maybe just starting out with a tool and you want the company to use it, to go through the different stages of is this actually the right approach? And do not think that you are the expert, but to also try this out with the other experts that you have in the company. And these processes take long, because obviously from a technical point of view, you might think, I'm just going to install this tool and now everybody's going to use it. And now happily ever after, and the problem is solved. But that is mostly not the case. Every tool needs to go through its maturity levels. People have to get used to it. People have to use it. And maybe you have to adjust it, or maybe you just have to start all over again. And this is true for both toolings that you get from the market that you want to implement in a company, but also from toolings that you develop yourself. In the end, these things are both products, and these products, they have to work well for the problem that you are trying to solve.
No, like, I agree. Like nothing I can say. And so share a bit about like the industry, like scene, like and the Kubernetes scene.
Yeah, so this is maybe an interesting way to connect it to the Kubernetes industry. So I noticed that there is no Kubernetes community days in Romania, and I noticed that some time ago, and there are a lot of Kubernetes developers in Romania. A lot of the companies are using Kubernetes, so the knowledge is everywhere. And also Romania has a huge amount of software engineers and people working in IT. I believe way more than in the Netherlands. So I thought, why not change that? So I opened the GitHub issue for Kubernetes Community Days to organize that here. And I didn't know yet where that was going to go, because I was like, okay, who wants to help me? But I didn't know that many people in the industry or from the other companies. So I did a sort of a shout out also through CNCF. And then 1 month later, we had 10 people who all wanted to help making this a success. And we had our initial call, and that was already some time ago. And suddenly we see people, we have CNCF ambassadors, people that are writing open source projects, people that are heading cloud native groups in different cities of Romania. So it was really cool to see that a lot of things are happening inside Romania when it comes to Kubernetes. And I think we can also see that on the development of the KubeCon conferences, or all the projects that are being worked on. It's really increasing. More and more work is being done at the KubeCon. There was the biggest conference I've ever seen at 10,000 people. So yeah, the development is going in the right direction.
Oh, it's
Not just specifically for Romania.
No, I completely get what you're saying. Like, interesting maybe to hear, like, let's talk about the future, right? Like, we talked a bit about telemetry and a bit about backstage, but, like 2 years from now, what trends do you see emerging? What changes? It can be both like cultural if you want, or like personal, or like ChatGPT, or technology, like whatever. Everything is on the table, but what's your take about, what the future have in store for us in like mainly in the Kubernetes space, right? But you can give prediction about whatever you like.
Oh, that's a good question. That's I wouldn't know it at the top of my head where Kubernetes is going, or I cannot think of anything either. I think what I mentioned earlier is the tool development around it. So since Kubernetes is more and more the de facto approach, you see a lot of companies actually building around Kubernetes. So that is something that I see is going to become more stable. I think in time that will mean that there will be a few of these offerings which are going to become the standards and the market leaders. Because right now, I think when we look at the toolings, they're not that big market leaders yet. And I think, all in all, it will lead to a way easier way of using Kubernetes as a whole, together with everything that surrounds Kubernetes.
Do you see like eBPF or data on Kubernetes is something that is going to change something? Like I see or like hear a lot of, like moving the state from the cloud provider or whatever into Kubernetes. Any ideas on that? And also like eBPF is also really trending, right? Like at least as a buzzword, right?
I have to say, I don't know what's eBPF.
eBPF is like writing kernel level plugins, you can say, that helps you to do like things such as network or like network level policy in a standardized way inside Kubernetes that is also very efficient because it's like kernel level. So it is basically like companies such as Pixie Labs or Ground Cover or the Calico project are using these tools in order to implement like a new way of observability on one hand, security best practices on the other, and a lot of work around networking. Like how do I like network cross cluster, across region, like a lot of like even if I think like in general is very, very cool. And that project, I really hope I'm pronouncing it right. It is like a very, very like cool project that is taking off. And also the second one, Calico basis Cilium. Cilium is like the even more popular one. And so for anyone who don't know BPF, maybe I'll do like an episode on that. But like I was a bit skeptical at the beginning. I'm a bit skeptical of how much does it going to change the observability landscape, because I think the current players are quite good. OpenTelemetry was a huge change. I don't think the problem is really in the collection of the data anymore, like a kernel level. That's how I see it. But in the network player, it is very interesting. I think like for big clusters, we see from our customers, like big banks, like the CNI, like defaults are not necessarily that good, or like they have like flaws. Are you using like everything defaults, like when it comes to the network layer, or?
I have to say I'm not familiar with that. That's what our platform team is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem. And what about data in Kubernetes? Do you think like, I don't know, like S3 on Kubernetes, or I don't know, are you guys have like databases running on top of Kubernetes? Like the
we try to use as much stateless as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So then also all the applications that I work on are stateless. This makes the work for standardizing and scalability also a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And we still do have things running on virtual machines, especially the ones that require data. Not, I think every application that requires a database, but the stateful the stateful applications, we try to still use them on virtual machines.
Okay, I'm going to ask you like one last question. I know that you are not only a DevOps engineer, but also a mountain climber. Do you see any parallels between the two, between Kubernetes adoption, mountain climbing, and anything else that you like to add?
Oof, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I'd say keep trying until it works. with mountain climbing, sometimes you have to push through to reach the peak. That's also what I did last weekend. I climbed the mountain last Saturday, and I still have sore muscles from it. And with Kubernetes, yeah, sometimes you're debugging with no end in sight, and it's important to not give up. Kubernetes, in my opinion, is not an easy thing to work with. It requires knowledge and experience, and you get that over time. And I also find it interesting at the same time. You can get started with it really, really quickly. You can have a Kubernetes up and running in no time, but then actually having it like production grade and understanding what you're doing and making sure that everything stays secure, reliable, and scalable, it's not that easy.
I always like tell people that the problem with Kubernetes is it makes everything look so easy in the beginning. Like everyone thinks, like it's so like kubectl apply and that's it. Like I have my app running, and then you understand that you have no idea how things are really working under the hood. Yeah. And someone need to know, like not necessarily like everyone, right? Like if you have a big team, you can be oblivious of like some parts. It makes sense, but a lot of the companies that we talk with, like no one has this knowledge, and then it can be.
It's the same thing with platform teams as well. If you're using a tool that's being maintained by a platform team, there's no way to know everything what goes on underneath, and you should not have to know everything that goes on underneath.
It's a question of also like trust, right? Like it makes sense. Okay, I think we are all set up. It was a pleasure having you, and hope to talk soon, maybe in the next KubeCon or the next KubeCon.
Yeah, who knows? Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Kubernetes for humans.